Right, every parking garage the night before. Jury notification, D'Shawn Cunningham, so everyone coming in. They're like, what? There's a lot of ways to do it. You gotta see what they're gonna do first.
You know, like, I think there's a lot to be said for, like, you know, I think a lot of people have an attitude of, well, they can't stop an unjust law, unjust ordinance, an unjust piece of legislation. So I think a lot of people just have an attitude of, since I can't do anything about it, you know, since they think they can't do anything without risking their time, without risking a livelihood sometimes.
Why I did it is because a lot of people don't have that same recognition for, you know, the work I've done, or, you know, more commonly is they don't have the money to afford a lawyer, afford, you know, somebody to basically enforce their rights for them. So that's why I'm doing this, is to show people you got to know how to do it all for yourself, because if you don't know how to do it, yeah, you are going to face, you know, the maximum sentence. You are going to be up against a very well practiced machine, you know, but that machine can be dismantled. It's not always a matter of rallies or things like that. You know, there is a law, even if we don't agree with it. Now, is it more beneficial to people that have these laws in place, or is it better to do what you can to show that some of these laws, one, are useless and don't need to be there, and two, you know, when it comes down to enforcing, what is it we're really enforcing? A lot of it comes down to money, capital, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And if you don't have that, you know, you're still expected to play the game, but, you know, your hands are tied, your feet are bound.
Yeah.
That's what actions like this should help us do, is, you know, show how to unshackle ourselves, you know, show how we don't always need to rely on high-powered lawyers, having people show up to court and things like what you're doing, personal citizens meeting, that kind of stuff is great, because, you know, we rely on these systems that really don't benefit us in the long run. And it's not so much just to be about them, you have to
What would you say to someone who said, D'Shawn, what you're doing is impractical, it's petty, there's no long-term value to what you're doing here today? What would you say to someone like that?
Well, I would say part of it does come from, I don't know if I would say petty, but definitely a place of desperation. It's, I guess I would say a principle of desperation. A lot of people, when they find themselves in these situations, they, you know, like I said, if they don't have the lawyers, if they don't have the knowledge, they do feel cornered. They flash out. You know, that's just natural human behavior. Me sitting at a podium, you know, and not refusing to leave, yeah, it would be considered flashing out. But, you know, I didn't cause anyone harm. I didn't threaten anyone. So even though it is it could be seen as a petty or desperate, or even like a publicity stunt, you know, I don't need any more publicity, and not all publicity is always good. But the reason I'm doing this is to show that even when they pass these seemingly benign laws, you know, they pass them with the intent to enforce them and police them. I watched the tape earlier today, and they said, well, this become police matters, but then they said this is a tool for the police to use for parking incidents. And I said, this is, again, you know, this goes back to the Seward Street thing. That whole thing stemmed from a parking incident. And now, you know, a lot of people think it is, you know, hey, oh, you know, that doesn't really matter, that doesn't have anything to do with the police. But in a way it does. Before the police can move, they have to have these laws in place. They have to have the T's crossed and I's dotted that say what they can and can't do. And that's where, you know, you see the enforcement side of things. So if they want to, you know, pass an ordinance, but say they don't want to enforce it, that's a lot. Why pass it in the first place if they don't plan on using it?
Could you expand a little bit more? You mentioned earlier, like, this kind of comes from a desperate place. What exactly could you maybe explain that a little bit for someone that might?
Yeah.
What would you say is, for someone someone that doesn't know your history, doesn't know you, D'Shawn, what is the sort of the desperate
Well,
component?
I would say, like, okay, when in my police work, one of the things that I did was, you know, I've said it wasn't just about having the cameras for the citizens' benefit, it's the cops' benefit too. If somebody ever had wanted to get violent with an officer, one, the community would have to face the harsher consequences than any lone wolf that decided, oh, I'm going to go get revenge against an officer. Well, guess what? You're going to get shot, or you're going to get jailed, and you're going to have to live with the consequences of that. The community that you're supposedly trying to help will. And when I say, you know, it comes from desperation, I talked about, you know, what makes someone even think something like that is legitimate. You know, say, you know, the idea that they put out is people like me that protest or speak out against these things is that we have psychological issues, or however they want to spin it. I was just in court for another guy the other day that had been charged with obstructing the government around other police work that he's done, and it was the head of the union, you know, was questioning his mental sanity. You know, it's not that we're crazy, we're very mad at what we see being perpetrated over and over again by supposedly sane and rational people. These laws, these ordinances, all these things we live under, whether we agree with them or not, they affect us directly. Now, I could have, you know, if I was out for revenge, it'd be easy to be destructive in a council meeting, but things like that, like forcing, the reason I sat down is because, yeah, I just think it was wrong with excessive force. But again, if it would have been someone that didn't have the benefit of being a public figure or having a lot of money, they would have treated that person a lot differently. But people, they can expect to see more people do things like what I did, because if they don't know what to do, yeah, they are going to start to turn to desperate actions, but they won't have the principle behind it. So that's what I'm doing this, is to show people it's not about just lashing out, you know, even though if it is justified, you know, why you have beef with the state or whatever, but think about the long-term effects. Don't get so down to think, oh, nothing can ever change. I might go to jail, but you know what, if I do, you know, I can still use that to our benefit. There's a lot of people in jail in these situations, you know, probably have false reports on them.
I'm not here for you, are they?
But, they'll probably go ahead and get headed in.
Yeah, do you have any last words? Last words.
Before we go in, I mean, like I said, you know, you really don't know. I mean, if they try it, I guess that means they think they have a point to prove. If not, then, you know, that lets us know how much bargaining power we actually have as citizens.
Right.
You know, and that's why I would encourage people to do this. But, you know, the more exposure around this, the more attention to things there are, the less likely these people are going to get away with making bad laws and enforcing them.
Totally.
Thanks.
Totally. Thank you, D'Shawn. Yeah, this should be good.
All right, when you're ready.
Well, yeah, just D'Shawn, so what happened inside?
We were filing a motion to quash. That basically means we were filing to have it dismissed on First Amendment grounds, that what I did was actually protected speech. And basically my lawyer, my public defendant, argued that causing an annoyance shouldn't be what the government tries to prevent. They can deal with annoyances. You know, it's about the government silencing dissent from people. And they argued that just because I sat there on the other side, the prosecutor argued that since I created an obstacle by sitting there, that somehow constitutes not being able to get it dismissed, that there should be a trial, which is their prerogative to do. But at the same time, you know, I've always wanted a trial, because the thing is, I want people to see what it looks like when they start to silence dissent. You know, what can you do to counter that? It's not a one-person effort. It takes a team of people to stand up against things like this. So at this point, we're going to have our pre-trial July 11th, and I believe that's when they do jury selection. But basically, from how it went in there, my side argued very heavily for this being protected speech. This isn't what the law was created to stop. But, you know, at the same time, they want their pound of flesh, so I'm prepared to see it through to the end, and hopefully once it gets in front of trial and in front of the citizens, they'll see that no real obstacle was created and that what I did doesn't rise to the level of facing a year in jail.
You know, I apologize. I never got to my speech. I was too busy trying to explain your situation to a lot of people, and I got visited by I don't know if they're called bailiff or just, you know, courthouse security or whatever they're called.
Sheriffs.
Yeah, because I was being so loud and
I think they even brought that up because they had even said, right now there's a guy out there protesting, and in some of the courtrooms they can hear him, but we can't stop that guy. So yeah, they even kind of argued for what you were doing as part of, you know, why they can't stop you. So it does, it applies. You know, you're one person doing what you believe needs to be done, just like I did. But
yeah,
even then, you know, you have to know how these things work because they do look to stop it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think I was lucky partially. At first I kind of pushed back a little bit when I was approached, but what I guess what I want to try to get to is I hope that activism can flourish in Omaha, and I keep close track of a lot of disobedience trials that go on in New Hampshire. I'm a big fan of a lot of the activism that's occurring in New Hampshire, and I know I'm not very optimistic about disobedience law, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic, and I'm not trying.
That's part of the thing. You know, a lot of people are overly optimistic. They don't think that they might have to do the time for the crime. You know, that's why I'm saying it has to be principled. You know, if you even something like blocking a street or something, you might be doing it for all the right reasons, but you still have to be prepared for the repercussions. Be prepared for a trial. Be prepared to sit it out in jail, because that's where they want you. Now, if you know that they want to put people like us in there, start learning how jail works. Start learning how court trials work. You know, don't just go in there and sit there and get discouraged. It's about taking what we have and turning it all into a positive, because doing this work, there is a lot of negativity. There is a lot of volunteer efforts that goes into this stuff. But I would say activism in Omaha is actually, I think, in a good state, because look at what we've been able to do with the police issues. We have a review board that we didn't have, which was a start for getting something better. We have them starting to use cameras, which is something that nobody was talking about before we did it. But we're going to start to see the repercussions from that, the good ones. You know, you're going to see less people get assaulted. You're going to have less negative interactions between police and citizens. So yeah, it takes principled people seeing things through the end. It's not just, oh, we're going to show up this one time and it's over with. It is a lifestyle. Everyone should want to live to be free. You know, and if you don't stand up and assert your freedoms, yeah, they're going to be taken away. Yeah, your life isn't going to be what you want it to be. But the more you sit back and don't do anything, you know, yeah, you're going to slowly march out of jail. You're slowly going to dwindle into unhappiness and irrelevance. You know, stand up.
Can you tell me more about, I was pretty excited by some of the things that these guys said. They said that maybe it got a little, I don't know if heated's the right word, excited.
Yeah, it was definitely not what they're used to dealing with in misdemeanor court.
Here's a good question. Who charged you? Who or what entity claimed to charge you with?
That's what I'm hoping we find out more when we go to trial, because if it's the city council as a whole, that's one issue. If it's, you know, just the city of Omaha as its own entity.
How did the prosecutor characterize it? Was it the people of Douglas County versus you, or something like that? Or
they said, well, yeah, that's what they have to say. But you know, ultimately, we know that's not entirely true.
No.
So, but I think, you know, with them arguing for it so hard, in a way, I'm glad, because it makes them look bad. It's like, You want to put all that work to put me in jail for a year for sitting down for a couple minutes? Meanwhile, we've got people with guns out here in the streets that they don't do anything about, you know, so it's like, there's a lot of points to be made with this. This isn't anything criminal. I'm not obstructing the government. I'm trying to get the government to work for the people again.
Right.
You know, I do believe in order. I do believe in having guidelines for things, but they don't need to be overreaching like a lot of these things we're living with now.
So what? I didn't mean to interrupt you if you had more thoughts. So what are your thoughts now? You know, an hour later or whatever. How are you feeling now? What do you think you've learned anything more? Or?
I mean, I've definitely learned that this is going to be a big fight that they're prepared to deal with, and that they, in a way, don't want. But I'm the same way. I don't want to deal with it, but it's what I decided to do. But I am happy that I will still get to keep my right to a jury trial and put this in front of the people and let them decide. You know, that's where the real power lies. I'm trying to show people it's not just about what the people in those robes and in that building say.
Yeah.
We have the right to nullify things like this. We have the right to decide what laws we do and don't want. And it starts in a small term with things like this, but we need to get it into the bigger term, you know, start the ball now, educate people, raise awareness around things like this, do effective actions, and you'll start to see the lasting change.
I get the impression, do you think people will follow your example, or are you even concerned about that?
I think people will. I'm not expecting like hundreds of people to just show up overnight. It's never like that. But I've been doing this long enough to know that it's like farming. If you plant a seed, but you don't do anything with it, you're not going to reap anything. But if you plant a seed, have some seasons of work with it, you're going to start to see little sprouts. I think we've seen a lot of little sprouts, especially around the police issues in Omaha. You see other groups taking to the streets, having their own rallies, being more cooperative with murder investigations, coming together as a community to give evidence. You know, people putting money towards things like Crime Stoppers. Those are the fruits we've seen of our labor. With this, I'm planting different seeds to get people to see how we live and govern our city affects us a lot more directly than anything anyone in Washington, D.C. does. Those people in D.C. are safe 1,500 miles that way. These people here, they're our neighbors. And if we don't like how they're doing it, we can get them out of those offices. But until we start to think like that, we're going to keep getting steamrolled.
Cool. Do you have any thoughts as far as moving forward, as far as like the strategy going forward? Or still?
I guess I'd probably rather keep that to myself.
Let that brew. Okay, yeah, I can appreciate that. I can totally appreciate that, D'Shawn. Okay, and that's all the questions I have. Anything else you want to say?
Again, thanks for coming out. Like I said, you know, stuff like this, you know, we don't need 3, 6, and 7. You know, we got to start doing for ourselves. You know, and if we don't ever try to do it, it's never going to work. So thanks for coming out.
My pleasure.
All right. All right. Looks like my ride's here, so I just got to get rolling.